quickly get this started. Sorry we're a little late, everybody. I already spoke to this a little bit, but for those of you who didn't hear it, so the context for this is that there's been a recurring group with a number of FFI executives, a group of other independent producers and production company executives talking about and dealing with these COVID realities throughout this entire process. So this is really a meeting of that group who have now invited in a number of producers who have actually gone back into production and dealt with these COVID realities firsthand. So this is really a roundtable discussion to get into those details, to learn about what actually happened on these productions that moved forward. And because there was so much interest in the topic, we decided to open it up to this webinar format so that other people could listen in and get this information firsthand, because it's incredibly valuable to all of us to solve this problem we're all trying to figure out, which is how to make movies and television productions in this environment. For those of you who are just attendees, you will be able to ask questions in the Q&A. I would just ask that maybe wait 20 to 30 minutes because I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of topics that you have questions about and then kind of limit it to questions that we haven't already addressed. But we're just going to open it up to everybody. So for quick introductions, I'm Steve Berman, Executive Vice President of Film Finances in Los Angeles. And I'll go around the screen as I see everybody. If you could unmute yourselves. We have Carol McGorian.
Hi, I'm Carol McGorian. I'm Vice President of Production Analysis at Film Finances, and I've been part of this working group, working through finding out how to get productions going. I've experienced 2 shows that are back up. One is already completed shooting that was shut down for COVID, and I have a second one that's shooting now that was shut down from COVID earlier in the year. So got 2 shows with experience.
Jamin O'Brien.
Yeah, I was like most here, probably in pre-production March 13th, opening office March 16th. I haven't worked since, so I'm happy to hear everybody's experiences.
I like to, no,
Jamin would be part of the working group.
Part of the working group. Sorry.
And Michelle Lilly.
Hi, I was an HSM on a reshoot that I did with Sonia Linsford here in the completed 2 weeks ago now. All safe and sound.
And sorry, just because your audio is a little low, where was your shoot taking place?
Upstate New York.
Oh, okay.
Hudson area. Hudson Valley.
Moira Holmes.
Oh, hi. I'm the president of Film Finances Canada, so I'm from the far north. And we have quite a few projects that are starting up, and so I'm super curious to hear about people's experiences. And we have the wonderful Jason Gillet, who's one of our producers, who is currently shooting a film using various COVID mitigation, so he'll have lots to say. So that's it for me. Jason?
Yes, I, Jason Gillette, shooting a film just north of Toronto in a city called Sudbury. And we are in day 8 of 25 right now. So just in the midst of it.
And Jason, for those of you who are shooting, can you also, is it a feature and the general budget size?
It's a feature film, just under 2.5
okay.
budget.
Bob Graff.
Hi, how are you? I am a producer. I was one of the producers on The Tragedy of Macbeth. That is.
They told me I had to come out now.
We went back into, we shut down like many people on the 13th. At the time, we were about 2/3 of the way through, and we returned on the 21st and completed 3 weeks of filming a week ago this past Monday.
Karen Getchell.
Hi there. So I was the production manager on The Tragedy of Macbeth, and Bob summarized it, and we wrapped a week ago Monday. And after 15 days of shooting, actually 16 days of shooting, 0 cases, I'm thrilled to say. We still have a little bit of wrap happening on the ground in Los Angeles. We were based out of Warner Brothers, so it was an entirely staged production, which put us in sort of a unique position. Everything was pretty contained. We did have one location day, a second unit day that was a location day, but there's tremendous relief in just overseeing the wrap as it is now and not having any cases during the shoot.
Right. Jimmy Price.
Hey, Jimmy Price here. I just finished up producing a 7-day shoot of additional photography. We wrapped last Thursday in Central New York. It was a IATSE film, about $4 million budget. But our unit actually felt a little bit bigger because our additional photography had a lot of stunts, and probably half stunts and half stage builds. We worked in Syracuse, Liverpool, New York.
Thank you.
It went really well there.
Paula Manzanito.
Hi, everybody. I am also with Film Finances, together with Carol. We have been across 2 productions, one that wrapped a little while ago. We have the line producer on that, Francis Losell, coming aboard to talk to you guys. And we're also working on a second production that was shut down before starting the first day of principal, and they are now in their first week in the Dominican Republic. We have one of the producers on that show, Linda McDonough, on this panel too. And I'm also part of that task group that Steve was referring to, together with my other colleagues and esteemed producers.
One of those being Bob Salerno. Bob?
Yeah.
Hello. Bob Salerno. I'm an independent producer based out of New York. I'm on part of the Film Finances Working Group Committee, as well as the PGA Safety Committee, and have worked and advised with the Screen Actors Guild as well. So I've gone through lots of routines and have been working on budgets and schedules in the COVID era.
And as Paul was just mentioning, Linda McDonough. Linda, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Nice to see everyone. Hi, in particular to Bob Salerno. Carol and Paula mentioned we have a film together in the Dominican Republic. It went down the day after our last day of pre-production, so the day before our first day of principal photography. And I think we flew our director back to the Dominican Republic about 4 weeks ago, our line producer 5 weeks ago. And we have a 22-day shoot. It's a feature film. It's a budget of around $5 million. And we have had 1 false positive on the show for every week that we've been there.
Okay. We will get into that. Francis Losell, you've now joined us. If you can unmute yourself.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Francis Losell, and I was halfway through shooting a $5 million film here in Puerto Rico. And we spent all the shutdown time, about 3 months, figuring out how to restart as soon as we could. And we restarted and shot the remaining of the film. And it was a great success. So I'm happy to share with all of you our experiences.
Thank you. Josh Theron.
Hi. I had the double whammy. I had a show 3 days from shooting when it was actually additional photography, and we ended up, creating some procedures to get through it. We doubled up on our units, shot 15-hour days, and did it 5 days worth of photography in 3 days, and then got out of Dodge. And then I just shot additional photography for a film that I did last year, and that was much more structured and organized from conception. Even though the prep was very short, I have to say there were some great lessons learned on that one, and thankfully it was only additional photography, not an entire film, because it's a lot to tackle.
And where was the additional photography?
Los Angeles.
Okay. And what was the size of the film originally? Just
50 million.
Okay. Maureen Duffy, who doesn't have a visual, but she's on the phone.
Hi, I'm the new owner of Dave's COVID Roundtable and the longtime cruise director at Film Finances. So welcome aboard, and I hope this is helpful for everybody.
And then we also have Kelly Todd from Endeavor.
Hi, everyone. We are just getting up and running on a feature film in Greece. We are under 6 million is our budget range, and we are about 5 weeks out from camera. So we are learning how clunky it is to get up and running, and very grateful to be on this panel to hear from all of you who have done it successfully.
And then we have Kate Clark from Film Finances Canada.
Hi, everyone. I work alongside with Moira in Toronto in our Toronto office, and I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say. It's great to be included.
Sorry, and then lastly, everyone keeps moving around on my screen, but Jennifer, I know you spoke quickly, but if you want to just reintroduce yourself.
I'm Jennifer Roth, and I was producing a film about 90 miles outside of Dubai when COVID hit, and we decided not to shut down. It was, there were no Americans, it was not SAG, not IA, and it was DGA, but I don't think they noticed that we kept shooting. And we wrapped on May 7th. And so we shot through all of it. And I've been on the roundtable since returning back to the States on May 21st.
Gotcha, thank you. So as I said, this is really going to be an open forum discussion, not like a question and answer specifically, but to get the ball rolling, I'll ask the big question that I get asked about 30 times a day, which is how much does COVID add to my budget? People talk in percentages, 10 to 20% seems to be the general range. Obviously I think that's, a very loosey-goosey estimation, but for those of you who have now actually been through production and seen the cost, how would you answer the question? What does COVID add to your production budget? And just to pick on someone, if Bob or Karen maybe want to talk about it, since you guys have actually shot and gotten to wrap.
Unmute, Bob.
Sorry. Karen and I were talking about that earlier today. We were talking about how to answer that question. And, it's tricky because obviously we were coming back and completing a film that had been largely prepped and was, sort of, preserved in amber in a way, because we were on, the entire movie was on stage at Warner Brothers on the lot. And so when we shut down on the 13th, we kind of walked away from our scenery, locked the doors, and it was most, sitting there. There were things that had to be kind of recooked and refigured out after we got back. So we did have a prep period to kind of ramp things back up. But, and then we were also in the position of, shooting in Los Angeles and having to kind of, please all of the unions to get appropriate waivers for all of this stuff. And so, it was not cheap. Between the shutdown costs and the restart costs and all of that, it was several $1 million, including all the testing and all the rest of that business. So obviously that, I think our experience is probably quite a bit different than, than a lot of, smaller shows or location-based shows or whatnot. We had a very extensive testing setup. We had rapid testing on site with an on-site lab, 5 days a week testing, 60, 70 people, plus the, and then another group of people getting 3 times a week and another group of people twice a week. So, it was not an enormous movie, but it was a big crew, a lot of rigging, a lot of kind of intense lighting and whatnot, even though it was not in terms of, the overall budget was probably in the 25 range. But yeah, so I don't know. It's funny. I mean, people have asked me the same question, obviously. My knee-jerk reaction is to say somewhere around 20% of the below the line, but I think it completely depends on the circumstances of the show, where it is, what kind of, what the sort of culture of the place where you're shooting is, what's the infection rate where you are, what's the size of your crew, can you quarantine, you know, can you not quarantine? I mean, all these things are going to be different for every show. You know, Karen, you can jump in if you want to.
You know, one of the things that was, you know, again, a little specific for us is the fact that it was a stage show. We had a tremendous amount of rigging. You know, everything that you see on camera is built by our construction department, painted, plastered. So, you know, upon our return, Bob and I were both a little shocked at the amount of time that all of these departments needed to ramp back up. And while you're consistently saying, okay, yes, the directive is to work in smaller groups, more physical distancing, you know, we were already a little bit behind when we shut down. We felt like we were at least 2 days behind when we shut down, but then our ramp up with construction and rigging was, you know, 2.5 weeks. You know, and you find yourself in a difficult position where you're telling everyone that these are all the new rules. Everyone is riddled with anxiety about this new way of working. And at the same time, we also knew that we had a lot of catching up to do from where we were when we stopped. But yeah, I wish there was a really clear answer, you know, about the cost. I think on average, our testing was averaged to about $155 per test.
But we probably, you know, I mean, we tested, you know, we performed thousands of tests over the course of, you know, what was 3 weeks of, basically 3 weeks of prep, 3 weeks of shooting, and 2 weeks of wrap. So it's a lot, you know, it's that.
By the end of this week, we will have done just over 4,000 tests.
Right.
Did you have any positives?
We had one false positive.
Wow.
Which, well, we had a positive before. It was a positive during a test in, so it was a pre-employment test. So we had one person test positive during that phase, and then we had a false positive like the day before we started shooting, which of course was alarming. But fortunately, we were able to pretty quickly confirm that it was a false positive, and so we got that group out of quarantine.
Bob, I want to ask you know, you mentioned the 20% below the line, which I know is a placeholder, but
yeah,
can you break that up at all? Because obviously there's the direct hard cost, testing, PPE, the COVID safety staff, but then there's obviously just the added cost of additional time, additional staffing as may be required. So is that 20% include all of that?
Sort of. I mean, you know, there's it's always hard because you're like, you can, you know, again, Karen and I were talking through this, and it's like, you can say, well, all right, we chose to shoot, and this was sort of part of the plan that we submitted to the unions and guilds. You know, we chose to shoot 10-hour days and shoot through lunch. So we're, you know, and it isn't, you know, and it's difficult because it's not even real French hours, because people can't eat on the stage. You know, you have to go somewhere else to eat because eating requires you to take your mask off. So it makes it very difficult for a lot of the crew that is right around the camera to find time to eat. But nonetheless, I think people were, you know, our crew was generally in agreement that that was the best way to go, and they appreciated the you know, shorter days and whatnot, and it worked well. But if you just take that fact, you're like, okay, you're going to go to 10-hour days instead of 12-hour days. So now that essentially you're going to add 20%. You're going to end up with a 20% longer schedule. So you may be saving some overtime, paying more money in meal penalties instead of the overtime, but you're extending your schedule by some period of time and increasing your, you know, and again, depending on what kind of movie you are, you know, increasing, for us, it was a lot of facilities rental, a lot of rigging costs, you know, rental packages, all the rest of that business. So you're certainly adding some costs as far as that goes. But again, then you're, you know, it's always those kinds of things are always balanced out with, you know, how can you approach things different? You're constantly trying to mitigate them. So it's not, you know, it's not ever as clear cut as just saying like, oh, well, we have to have a 20% longer schedule, and we have to add $1 million in testing and another, you know, $250,000 in you know, rentals and PPE and whatever. it's, you know, it always depends, I think. And it's interesting because I haven't had the experience of having to prepare a budget from scratch, and I'd love to hear from some of you who have, because I'm just starting one right now. So it's, and trying to figure out, like, okay, if you're starting this from ground zero and you're really trying to build a machine that's designed to work in this environment, what choices can you make to mitigate these things? Because, you know, for us, in a lot of cases, it was like, okay, Warner Brothers is threatening to throw us out of our stages and strike our scenery because they have other clients coming. You know, we're way over our lease. We've got actors who are going to become permanently unavailable, that are well established, like number 4 on the call sheet, that we're going to lose for a year. So we had to get into production quickly if we were going to have any chance of finishing the movie. And so sometimes, you know, that meant that we plugged a hole where we saw a hole, you know, and we said, okay, great. If SAG is going to demand this kind of testing, then we'll do that kind of, we had to agree to a lot of things that, on the fly and under pressure, that if we were starting from scratch, we might choose to do differently.
Well, Josh, I mean, the fact that you just did a reshoot, which is obviously a smaller shoot, but a start to finish, what's your kind of assessment of what COVID added to that budget?
I just looked at the budget, actually. It was roughly around 10%. Mm-hmm. You know, we shot for 3 days. The locations were very minimal. Our Zone A was minimal. I mean, designed to be such. You know, the more locations you'd have in a day, the more Zone A's you'd have to protect. So we kind of kept it localized, which helped the cost overall. We did throw quite a bit of money at it, though, just because you never can have too much when it comes to that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it worked out to be roughly 10%. I mean, maybe slightly over, since I haven't seen the invoices yet, but that's about it.
Are there any kind of, I guess, surprises or misconceptions in terms of costs that either you weren't expecting or that you were expecting that weren't nearly as substantial as you were thinking going in?
No, but the multiplier of it all, you know, at the end of the day, you get a complaint or two and you just throw money at it rather than anything move up food chain towards the unions. You know, somebody says there's not enough stations close enough to set, 3-4 more washing stations, more PPE, more anything they want, just to keep everybody safe and content, and, you know, not only safe, but the feeling of being safe.
Yeah, I totally agree. The feeling of being safe is really important. You know, it's one of those things that we certainly found at the beginning. And, you know, like, as Jennifer, as you said, maybe when you were doing your show, you were sort of not, you know, you maybe had a different type or a different level of anxiety just by virtue of people's exposure and understanding of the issues in a different way. Because, I mean, you know, certainly I'm sure everybody had the experience when you shut down, and when everybody shut down in March, or for those that did, people's anxiety level was very high. You know, nobody knew what was going on, really. It was, everybody's just looking at their phones and whispering to each other constantly. And so, you know, finally the whole thing goes down. After we came back, it was, you know, it was a very eerie feeling for a lot of people, certainly for us too. When Karen and I, when we showed up at Warner Brothers, the first time they let us back on the lot, it was like we'd gone to Chernobyl, you know, where everything was kind of right where we left it and you just didn't know what to do. And so and then when we started shooting and people started coming back to work, first the construction and rigging departments, you know, it's like everyone's kind of tiptoeing around, and so, yeah, like you end up spending a lot of money for things that, you know, are going to help reduce everyone's anxiety, because that's sometimes as important as, you know, the things that are actually, you know, there are many things that are more effective than fogging the set, but fogging the set makes people feel pretty good. So you fog the set. And
the electrostatic sprayers are a big hit with Griffin Electric.
Yes.
It really does a lot to reduce anxiety. I highly recommend them. Just say yes. Yes, of course you can have an electrostatic sprayer.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. You can't underscore the ability for the crew to feel insecure. And, you know, you'll be working away and everything's fine, and then suddenly, like, one little thing will switch and everybody will sort of lose their minds. But I did want to speak a bit to the budgetary concerns, because I also found that there were surprising savings for us, to the extent that, I mean, our director, Pierre Morel, he was great, but you know, it was a $35 million action movie in a foreign country, and you know, everybody was just so grateful to be there that they made everything work. I mean, we literally had no choices because the airwaves were shut, so we couldn't bring in any more crew. We'd hired every single person in the UAE who was qualified and would agree to work at that time. But you know, we were supposed to be in Dubai Stages for our stage work, which is a very expensive stage with a massive build, and we just pivoted and did it in a much more simple way. So there were opportunity costs, which I think, I mean, there were savings that I didn't anticipate, just because everybody was so flexible and everybody was so excited to be working and trying to solve these problems with us.
There's a question in the Q&A which you know, Bob and Jennifer, as you guys shot on stages, probably could answer. The question is, in regard to shooting at a stage, who would you say is responsible for retrofitting the bathrooms to be COVID friendly, the HVAC system with HEPA type filters, etc.? Is it each individual production or the studio?
Well, for us, in terms of the bathrooms, we just sidestepped the whole bathroom issue altogether, and we just ordered portable, separate, toilet facilities that were strictly for the use of our show, because again, it was sort of part of the protocols in the United States and with the unions that you're supposed to provide separate bathroom facilities for Zone A versus Zone B. So we just hired the executive washroom trailers that came with hand washing things and sanitizing and the whole thing. So we had, 3 or 4 of those that we just put right outside of our stages and moved around accordingly. So we took that into our own hands. As far as the filtration goes, Warner Brothers was pretty open and receptive to helping out with that. And so we had walked through all of our stages with our medical advisor that we had, and our consultant. And he kind of, he looked at the ventilation system and the exhaust fans and all the rest of that and made some recommendations. And so we went back to Warner Brothers and asked them to change out all the filtration, which they did.
Does anybody else who has shot want to address the question? Just cost. Sorry, Jimmy, I think you wanted.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back on the cost point. The cost in Central New York seems like it was a lot cheaper. I mean, I'm looking at numbers. We shot a 7-day shoot, $1.1 million, 7-day shoot, and our COVID costs were about $60,000. We were getting tests for $90 a test. We didn't have many actors, so that helped. We got quarantine exemptions for people coming into New York State, and the county executive's office was, they were very helpful to promote the business. They got a lab to come out and work with us, and guaranteeing bulk amount of work. The cost was pretty low. So there was more Zone A people than I had in my budget, but the financiers were understanding when we needed, when I under budgeted that, and came right in to help make sure we had enough funds for testing everybody. It just seemed like there was always more Zone A people than, we didn't have a lot of riggers. We had 4 riggers. It was a $4 million movie, so it wasn't like a whole rigging crew. So there wasn't that many Zone B. But, the intangible is, for every 5 days of shooting, you're used to shooting 12-hour days. Now that's 6 days of shooting. So we stuck to the 10 hours. We took lunch. Anytime we wanted to go beyond 10, which was a couple times, we just talked to the shop steward and the health safety officer and talked them through it. Just, if you guys feel safe, we'd like to continue to work a little bit of overtime, try to talk to them in advance, before you need to do it. We stayed away from French hours a bit because there was a little bit of pushback from the locals in New York on doing that. And it was more complicated than just getting approval on the day. It was a couple days in advance notice that you needed to do it. It went really well. We had, the PCR test for SAG, but for everybody else, we did the 24-hour lower nasal swab test. And it went well. Yeah, I would say it was looking like, 6% of the budget came in for COVID costs. With, the big intangible is the additional time you need to get the material, and how many actors you have, where they're traveling from, their testing in their state before they get here. That's something that's hard to wrangle too. But yeah, all in all, pretty well. But it's a different animal than Bob's film. But I think those costs would be, you know, coming down as testing, I hear, is even getting cheaper. I heard of 24-hour tests that are dropping in cost as well. So yeah.
Jimmy, and you had all the private, I mean, the restrooms and the wash stations, and ordered all those and supplied all the PPE.
Yeah, in that 60,000 number, that's about, you know, we had additional bathrooms. We had to add bathrooms on one day because somebody complained there wasn't enough bathrooms. And, you know, on a smaller film, that's a bigger hit to have trailers show up, but we just had to do it. And, we had enough contingency set aside for that. And yeah, we had trailer bathrooms. We worked in a studio in central New York for 3 of the 4 days. SAG needed to get filtration information on their air system, and they were the toughest one to get clearance. IATSE and Teamsters were pretty quick, you know, just recognizing a safe way forward document and an effort to try to work 10-hour days. And when you work 10-hour days, you're doing pre-calls, especially when you don't have a rigging crew. You know, we also shot 35mm film, so we had the camera department pre-calling a lot because we had to switch over from HD bodies to film bodies, and then we had riggers getting pre-calls, and everybody worked a little bit more than 10 at the end of the day anyway. But the 10-hour shooting seemed to be like a good welcome plan that everyone wanted to kind of embrace as much as they could. To, you know, it's extremely more tiring to be completely covered up and not breathing. And I'm just walking around talking to people every day. You know, when you look at the crew carrying equipment, it's you know, it takes a lot of toll. But we were shooting exteriors on 35, and the camera department was really spent. So we only kind of asked 2 of the days to go beyond 10-hour days, and it worked out.
Did you have pre-existing insurance already in place from the original for the covered COVID and liability issues, or?
We did, but we had to extend our policies, and it was all, you know, COVID was excluded from everything. So we just had to make sure everybody on the production company side was indemnified with financiers, which was a bunch of legal to work through, but everybody was on board with doing it quick. And, you know, we got it in, yeah.
I think it'd be great to hear a little bit from Frances, since her experience, like Jennifer's, was outside of the continental US in Puerto Rico. And I think Frances was one of the first shows to go back on camera. She certainly wrote her protocol before The Way Forward was published. So, want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. For us, we had designed this film not considering COVID. So once we shut down, we just closed the trucks and sent everybody home. So we were ready to restart. But we did have to, we did needed some prep for almost every department. At the end, I calculated it's a 12.5% increase on the budget. We did 12-hour days, but with load in and load out, and it was hard because it was a film that we had to tweak it. Even we worked on the script and tried to make it work during the shutdown, but we obviously had additional bathrooms, testing for Zone A 3 times a week, and everybody else once a week, even the virtual. So, and the people were really scared because it was one of the first films, if not the first film to start. They were scared, you know, and I think the emotional side of it, of making sure that people felt safe, and having additional water stations and having additional set medics to be there just to be spraying hand sanitizer, made them feel a little better. I do agree that we had unexpected savings as well, more than I had, just because I feel people were giving 150% to finish this film. We were against time. We were about to lose our main character to Mission Impossible. So they really the crew really helped. I think for us, the hardest part was getting IATSE. to sign off on our restart. And once we were there, they were very collaborative and very involved on sending us notes every day on things we could improve. So it was a very close work with the union. We were lucky we didn't have anybody sick during our 9-day to finish the shoot. I had to send home our second AD who has been close to somebody that had COVID, and those who had shared the trailer with her. It was stressful, but I think we get used to everything. So I think testing is it's gonna be the key here and moving forward. I am starting a new budget, so we'll see how that goes.
Something that nobody's really touched on yet specifically, but it's a huge, obviously it's an added cost. It's basically a whole new department, is your health and safety department, your COVID compliance department. So if we could touch on that, there's a bunch of questions about it too, basically in terms of how much staffing is needed, what are the rates generally for these people? I know it'll vary wildly. Michelle Lilly's on, who I believe served in this role on a movie. So if people want to kind of speak to that in terms of the number of people you need and, you know, kind of how to properly budget for that, that would be great. Anybody wants to address that one?
I think that all in, we probably spent about $150,000, and that's not including fringe, on the personnel. I mean, you know, we had our safety consultant, we had our HSS, an HSM. We also hired medics, which we didn't have before. We were using the lot medics, and we wanted to hire people that would be subject to our testing protocols. We also quickly realized that we needed a testing coordinator, which was a hugely complex and important job, just to kind of oversee, you know, the testing in of all the crew. We required 2 negative tests for anybody starting. You know, so he sort of managed all of that. And then once we had our zones and pods configured, you know, and our testing protocols established for each of those, he would make sure that everybody was in compliance and coordinated the tests and all of that stuff. And he's also included in that number. We also had a production assistant that was just part of our testing operation. You know, she would be there at the lab, kind of intercepting cast and crew as they came in, prioritizing them to go to the front of the line if it was a cast member that we needed to get through quickly. But, you know, something that I hadn't thought about that came up a lot was, you know, the zone A, zone B thing gets a little complicated in terms of when crew are coming in the morning and you're screening everyone, doing the temperature screenings. All of a sudden it's like, oh, we need 1 person for zone A and we need 1 person for zone B. Usually we could cover it with the HSS and HSM and with the medics, but there were definitely times where we were split. You know, we had a sizable off-production crew where we were split between off-production and production, and we would have to bring in some extra people. But that's sort of the overview of our.
I think, like, if I could just jump in, one thing about the HSS and the HSM that I think that we found was that, you know, it's the way that the Fifth Way Forward document sort of presents it is that these are people with a medical background, and that was the case with us. We had a lovely our health you know, sort of health safety supervisor was lovely and fabulous, but not really a production person, you know. And this is the difficulty, I think, in this job in general, is that the way that document presents it, this is supposed to be the person who has ultimate authority to, you know, close down your movie or order these people to do that, and is supposed to be enforcing the compliance. But in our experience, even though, you know, our HSS came with, you know, great credentials, you know, registered nurse, public health nurse, had worked at Sony in the health and safety department previously, but still that's a different thing than knowing your way around a set and really even understanding what people do, So if you're looking, so when it comes time for someone to be, we're shooting on a stage and you're, okay, we finished lighting, it's time to bring in the cast, and you want to sort of do a little shuffle, and there's a whole group of people that have been working on the, on a lighting setup, and now they should really vamoose. They got to get out because they have no reason to be in there while the cast is there. But it's the HSS, I think people sort of expected that person was going to be enforcing these things somehow, and they just can't. They don't know they don't know who needs to be there or what their job function is or whatnot. So it's funny on a bigger movie, I sometimes mused like, wow, okay, maybe you even need almost like an additional second to just bird dog the COVID compliance on the set, because the first AD and the second AD, they have too much to do. They can't always be focused on that, and it's kind of, it's an issue. So we found that there was also, as we've said, obviously we were a completely stage-based show with the exception of like a little second unit day, but we quickly determined that we needed a location department. We needed like a unit manager who was going to sort of set up all the tents and the eating areas and the bathrooms and order this stuff and set up a PPE distribution zone and just make it run the way that you need it to run on a production, because the HSS and the HSM don't know how to make that happen.
No, I was just going to say that Francis and Linda could speak to this because they have the same person managing their COVID response team, the wonderful MJ Delgado. So
yeah,
go for it.
What we had a great UPM come in as in a new position. It was a health and safety production supervisor.
Yeah,
and she was in charge of not only coordinating the testing, which is a lot of work in itself, but also making sure that the additional location team that we had to set up, we had 2 entry points at all times for Zone 8 and Zone B. We had different lunch areas, bathrooms, everything. So that was an impact on location, but all that coordination on the cleaning, on the sanitation, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, on the locations of the trucks, of all the information. And I think that made a big difference for us. And it's
yes.
I believe that our health safety officer was a doctor, and he just prescribed and he helped us deal and follow protocol in case we had doubts. And then the manager was there managing on set. But that position, I think it's needed to be able to run the production smoothly, because there's too much going on for even production. We're trying just to get our days to make sure that everybody is on, that the production is moving forward. And it's just a production within the production. So I think that really was super value for the production to be able to be running smoothly.
Yeah, and Linda can probably speak to this too. One of the things that your supervisor was incredibly invaluable at doing is really troubleshooting when your health department got bogged down. When, there were delayed on tests and stuff like that, she was the one that was also interfacing with the labs, the doctors, the guilds, your union rep that was on set, etc. So, Linda, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. So when we didn't have MJ when we started out, so it's been a learning curve for us, and what I'm hearing everyone say is the conclusion we came to is that this is a completely separate production functioning inside the overall production. And I think one of the things that we learned is if you just follow the safe way forward, that's sort of a foundation. But like everybody is saying, every production has its own bespoke needs. And producers and line producers will start to troubleshoot problems reflexively because that's what we do. But every minute that you spend dealing with COVID issues, which invariably take priority because they are life and safety issues, are minutes that you're not producing the movie. And it needs somebody who understands production to coordinate the entire thing. And I think, you know, if money were no object, you would have a producer, someone like MJ, who is a UPM and part of the DGA, who would quarterback the COVID team. I think that you would probably have a testing coordinator, because thousands and thousands and thousands of tests are happening, and there's anomalies in every day that you need to deal with cast and crew. Somebody that doesn't make it on time for their test, somebody that wasn't registered on a list ahead of time that needed to be when the lab shows up. There's always going to be problems with the lab that need to be then retrofitted to what the production plan was. That's one person's job, is testing is coordinating the testing. I think having a second in there is a good idea, because you almost need a testing call sheet that's separate from your production call sheet, because people need to get tested on days that they're not necessarily working. So the production call sheet has everybody that's working, but not necessarily the people that need to be tested in advance of the days that they're working. And then you need a second would be perfect for that, and also to interface with your AD department, because you are going to be pulling people off the set throughout the day, and you want somebody that does understand production and the language and has the reflexive relationship with an AD team to do it. And then on top of that, and I'm experimenting with this on our next production, is bringing in an epidemiologist, because I'd like that person to be a part of planning from the very beginning, read the script, give input onto what might be safer choices from the get-go in the way that you're approaching production, whether it's on location or on a stage, and how many people are involved and how close in proximity they may be to each other. It just, from the very, very early stages of planning, having that point of view about what you're doing, about being on set with you during your scouts if you can, so that they're helping you lay out the blueprints that you have to submit to SAG about how all your zones are working. Again, producers will take on that job and start becoming amateur epidemiologists, making these decisions, but it takes you away from the job of producing the movie. And then if something does go wrong, to have an epidemiologist who's, okay, the lab's not turning it around. We have a contract with one lab. We don't need to be beholden to that one lab if you have an epidemiologist who has a relationship with 50 labs in the country. And if you're somewhere that's in a hot spot and civil authority takes precedent over what your testing is, this is if you don't have your own lab, then you need to be able to punt and pivot and have somebody with the relationship direct it. And the hours are important, whether it's 24 hours or 48 hours. If you don't have someone that has those relationships and can make that call right away, and then an epidemiologist on top of it all is the thing I heard someone say earlier, is what's the feeling of being safe? If you have an actor who wants to travel to location, if they have air travel and they need a hazardous materials suit, what's the right one and why is it the right one? And who's the person with scientific authority that can give them confidence that that's the right one? That's maybe the number one feeling of safety issue that I've wrestled with, is as I watch people try and answer these questions to the guilds and unions and actors, is that none of us have that scientific authority. And we're doing our best to educate ourselves. But it's a conflicted relationship to be the producer giving advice about this to actors or to crew. And if you have an epidemiologist, it removes that ethical conflict. So that's just a broad range of my observations and the learning curve and what we're going to try.
What did you do when you had a positive test? When you got a positive test back on set, what did you do?
Well, so the first time, it was like, a huge crisis, where we immediately, there was a phone tree that we had established and everybody started getting the phone calls. And by the way, I think we labored under the impression a little bit that if we were all really safe, we could get through it without such a thing occurring. And when you get a false positive, you assume it's a positive and you respond that way. So we immediately isolate that person, do the necessary contact tracing, isolate those people. We put into process having the second test to see if we're verifying that it's a positive or if it might be a negative. And simultaneously figuring out who's replacing those people if it turns out that one or more of them are actually positive. And for us, having this happen once a week on the film is, again, it is a full-time job for an experienced producer to quarterback.
I want to jump in just really quick because we have Michelle Lilly, who actually served in this role, so I'd love to get her take on it, and also correct a mistake. Sonia Lunsford is joining us, who I skipped accidentally in the intros because she was also logged in as Michelle's name, but I've now corrected it. So I'd love to hear Michelle's take on this. Actually, she served in, I don't know if it was the HSS or the HSM role, and let Sonia introduce herself as well.
Okay, I served as the HSM actually, so I wanted to second something that everyone has said here. I have a former background as a UPM as well. I served as the HSM on this show and wrote the protocols, submitted to SAG, DGA, IATSE, coordinated the testing, hired the RN who was the HSS, and seconding the fact that person would be great to have on-set experience. I 100% agree, because I found myself spending a lot of the time trying to bring her up to speed on what was going on what to expect, how to interact with departments, what their functions were. I found myself dealing a lot, having the conversations with all the crew members, the department heads before we started shooting in prep to talk about their specific needs, what to expect, to collaborate with them, and to try to figure out the best way to be safe on set. What could we do to reduce contact? What could we do to keep the minimum amount of people in Zone A? There are all sorts of things, comfort level, making them feel good. I mean, everyone's coming out of their cocoon for the first time. And so it's really important to make people feel comfortable. And I think by giving them, providing them a set of guidelines that the production company has established helps greatly, because then they feel more secure that you've, thought about, apart from the fact that, it's required by certain states, or by New York State at least, to have these protocols done for reopening. But it makes them feel better about, where you're coming from and how to connect with you. And then having personal conversations with everyone, which I did, helped even further to make them feel more secure and comfortable, so that, we did as much planning as possible beforehand, not only one-on-one, but in groups and on Zoom meetings, so that when it actually came time to shoot, I think it went pretty well, because people already knew what to expect. We talked about, different problematics that could happen, even, miking, who's going to mic the actress, how are we going to, bag and, wardrobe, how are we going to address that? Camera, how many camera crew. It was a small reshoot, but how many are going to be in zone A? Who absolutely needs to be in zone A? If the sound man's outside, where is he going to be, or can he be in another room? It's a lot of risk assessment, I think, too, when you're location scouting and you're considering a location. And I think if you understand how a set works and what is going to happen there in that location, I think it's easier to make a risk assessment if you have experience with this, because you need to consider time, the intensity of the action while the actors are unmasked on set, or whoever it is, and the distance, and how to do that effectively, and how HEPA filters, have they been replaced, have they not, what can you do if they haven't, in entry doors, exit doors. There's directional workflow considerations in exterior locations, which all has to be thought about. Crew parking, base camp relative to your health and wellness station setup. Where is that, and how to reduce time? Depending on what your crew parking situation, base camp. If you're shooting, or you're shooting an exterior location, any location, how is that set up, and how is that going to impact your day and the time spent during that day? And well, there's so much to consider, but I do wholeheartedly agree that the position, yes, the HHS is the medical clinical person that has the authority, but unfortunately they don't have this other experience. So it does make it difficult. So maybe they should be, as the epidemiologist, and a consulting role, who can test. We did all PCR nasal swab tests, the molecular tests, so the nasal pharyngeal testing. And then maybe the HSM is, like you said, second, or has had second.
I could chime in on that.
Sorry.
I think I experienced.
I think because you and Michelle are in proximity to one another, there's an issue. Wait.
Okay, there. It should be a DGA key second position to be super effective. The HSM is what we kind of came to, the conclusion we came to.
Gotcha. Well, so I was just gonna, unless somebody was gonna chime in, I was gonna ask a question about.
Yeah, and our
we were at 25%,
and we were at because we did PCR molecular testing. I think our costs for the whole time, we employed a testing company who trained our RN to administer the tests. She had already done testing sites in New York State, so was familiar with it. But I requested that she be tested by the testing company in order to save the admin costs on some of the admin costs. Her hourly was higher than, I mean, it was like 75 an hour. So on an 8-hour day, could have been negotiated. I mean, I think it should be, I've heard like 600 for 10, something like that. I don't know what anybody else has been paying. Our tests were a little more expensive because we didn't have a high volume. We only shot for 2 days. So our tests were about $165 a test for the nasal pharyngeal. We tested 72 hours, every 72 hours. It was a 2-day shoot, so we didn't have a whole lot of testing going on. I did find that the ability for the RN to be able to travel to some people, our cast member who was quarantining, our director who quarantined because they came from out of state, I found it helpful that she was habilitated to do the testing by the testing company so that she could travel to them. And that probably added a little bit to our cost because we had her doing house calls on some days, which isn't always ideal.